Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the week three go to session. This is the third out of four sessions that we're going to hold this month. We have a lot of information to go over, so let's just hit the ground running. I titled this week's presentation Building an Essay, but it really encompasses a lot of different things. But all of it's serving a single purpose, which is getting us to that week four project where you'll actually create a short essay where you identify an industry problem, you discuss it a bit, and then you encourage a specific audience to do something about it. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. I'm going to try to keep the PowerPoint presentation minimized. Let's see if I can blow it up a little bit to maybe 125, just because we had some issues in week one where when I tried to go full screen, it made the whole computer freeze and I needed to restart and enter the room. So we'll see how this works. But here's the agenda for today. I want to go over some reminders. I actually have quite a number of reminders to make about what we needed to do for week one, week two, even the beginning of week three. And then I want to get into the core material for this session, which includes the different ways we can appeal to an audience. There are fancy Greek words to explain this. I'll go over that and make it 100% clear and make it also clear what the connection to our assignments is. I want to talk a bit about thesis statements. You've probably heard that term before. Thesis statements are going to be important in order to complete the next major assignment, which is the next bullet point here, assignment number 2, a discussion activity called Finding a Solution. I'll go into detail about what that assignment is and even show you an example that I created that you can use as a model. I also want to cover some essay basics like introduction paragraphs, what they do. So I'll cover some tips and tricks to cover that. And then we'll take a sneak peek at what we're actually working toward, how this most recent upcoming assignment number 2, is actually creating the structure for your essay that you'll create in week 4. In other words, you won't just be creating the essay off the top of your head or doing it without any help or doing it from scratch. The assignment that we're working on now for week 3 actually is setting up the structure for your final essay so that you have a blueprint to work from. We're really building this essay piece by piece by identifying your topic in week 1, exploring that topic in week 2, creating a sort of outline. I call it a brief for this assignment, but a sort of outline, and then finally the actual writing of the essay in week 4. And just some real quick reminders at the end about the importance of audience and APA. Okay, so let's start at the beginning here with the different ways we can reach an audience. Okay. It's important to think of audience. Different audiences have different needs, and I'll try to give some examples of this as we continue throughout this session. But remember, you're identifying an industry problem, and you're encouraging a specific audience to do something about it. And the different audience that you might choose would obviously affect maybe the solution that you're trying to pitch. We talked about this a bit in week 1. Remember, back to the rhetorical situation, that triangle we looked at, that interrelationship between reader, text, and audience. If you change any single one of those elements, it affects the other two. And I'll give a concrete example of this in just a bit when I show you the model of the assignment that you'll be doing for the next discussion activity. Okay, so there are 3 general ways we can reach an audience. And they have fancy Greek words. And I really don't care if you remember the Greek words after today's session. Actually, you will need to remember it right after the session in order to complete the quiz. But after that, I don't really care if you remember the fancy words. I just want you to remember what they mean. So let's go over those different ways in which we can reach an audience. The first is called pathos, which is just a fancy way of saying the appeal to emotion. Think of those, if you're a big television watcher like I am, you might have seen those incredibly sad commercials for, I forget what it is. I think it's Animal Rescue or Adopt a Pet from a Shelter. But anyway, they're those pieces that have Sarah McLachlan, the singer. They're these incredibly sad pieces with sad looking dogs staring at you, and it's so uncomfortable that you sometimes have to switch to another channel, and you think after 2 minutes it must be over, but then you go back to the channel and it's still going on. Like, that's pathos, pulling on your heartstrings, appealing to your emotions. You could probably think of lots of different ways that the various things you see in life, not just in feature films or that you hear in songs, but even in commercials or in public service announcements or in ads, right? They try to get to you through emotion. And there's a good reason for that, because emotion is one of the strongest appeals you can make to another human being. So keep that in mind. One of the ways to convince a reader that your industry problem is important is to appeal to their emotion. When it comes to writing your actual essay, there are different ways to create emotion. You could share an affecting personal story. You could share an affecting story of someone else. You could reference a powerful news headline that focuses on a tragic situation. It doesn't always have to be like high tragedy, but you're appealing to one's sensibilities, one's emotions. That's pathos. So if we think about the appeal to emotion, the complete opposite of that would be, if we're not appealing to the heart, we could also appeal to the brain, right? Which introduces our next term, which is logos. In other words, the appeal to logic. So here we're not appealing to the heart, we're appealing to the mind. And the way we do that is typically through things like facts, statistics, right? If your industry topic is, I don't know, illegal downloads of movies or music, right? You could cite figures. You could cite actual dollar amounts lost by the industry. You could cite other facts or statistics. Like, those things appeal to our sense of reason, our sense of logic. Human beings can be appealed to through the heart, but they can also be appealed by really, really like convincing hard statistics. That's logos. And the final term, which is a little bit difficult to describe, is called ethos, which is the appeal to authority or credibility. Okay? In essence, whenever you create something, whether it's an essay, whether it's a speech, whether it's just a conversation that you're having with another person, one of the ways that you can convince another person that what you're saying is accurate or persuasive is to build credibility. You can do that in a number of different ways. For example, if you were, I don't know, think about those public service announcements for like Smokey the Bear, right? Only you can stop forest fires. Imagine if a fire marshal makes an appearance in that public service announcement to make his case, right? And before Smokey the Bear comes out or something like that. Like, you would trust his commentary on the issue more than, say, if Kim Kardashian stepped out and spoke to you about fire safety. Okay, you build credibility in lots of different ways. One is by citing credible, authoritative sources who know something either firsthand or very, very close to firsthand about your issue. You can also build authority yourself as the writer. Perhaps you have a background in the industry. It can share a specific incident or a specific story, right? And the reader might trust you more because you have a background in the area. You don't have to have a background in the industry in order to create credibility, but ethos is about establishing credibility. And it even includes things, small things, like the overall tone of your essay. Are you building your overall piece? Is it organized? Is it well written? Is it following the conventions of professionalism and grammar? All these things add to the credibility of the overall piece. So that's ethos. It's about establishing credibility. For your papers, it probably has more to do with actually turning to experts in the field who know a thing or two about your issue and either citing them or quoting them or something like that to add credibility. Okay, so again, you don't have to remember the fancy Greek words. Just remember we have three general ways to appeal to someone: through emotion, through logic and reason, or through establishing overall credibility or trust. Okay, next. Let's get into some essay fundamentals, because you're going to have to understand some of these terms in order to complete the next assignment. Oh, you know what? I need to back up a little bit. I said I was going to start with some reminders. So let me, this will actually be a good time to pause and go back to these reminders and create a sort of timeout in the incredibly factual stuff I was going over. So if we look at the activities page, okay, we're done with most of the week one stuff. Week two, some of you are completing tasks, some of you aren't. I'm a little bit concerned about that. For example, there was a quiz that was due in week two, right? The second go-to quiz. A bunch of people didn't take it, even though I created extensions encouraging people to complete it. But I'm most concerned about this here, the laying the foundation activity, which is a discussion board assignment, and I discussed it during the week one go to session. I reminded people of it in the week two go to session. I just posted an announcement the other day reminding people that this is due today, right? Is today the ninth? Yeah, today's the ninth. So out of 25 people, so far 4 people have posted their efforts to the discussion board. I'm probably going to go ahead. Actually, I'm not probably. I'm going to go right in there now and change the due date slightly to give more people a chance to complete the assignment. Okay, so it was originally due today. I'm going to give people until Thursday to complete this discussion. Let me click save. Um, Listen, I'm not looking for brownie points. I think I'm one of the more generous and flexible instructors around, but I can only be so flexible and so generous. If work isn't coming in, I have nothing to evaluate. It's my goal not to just push all of you through. You have to do the work and you have to do it reasonably well, but I do want to see the work coming in. It pains me to not have people pass, and my goal is to have everybody who's enrolled in this course the possibility of passing. So we really need to get on top of these assignments. The first discussion activity, which is called laying the foundation, remember, it's not a terribly long assignment. You create There are 2 parts. The first is a 300 word piece. 300 words isn't terribly long. It's like one, I don't know, longish paragraph where you define good writing, probably using a mixture of what we talked about in the first go-to session, what you read in the required readings. I believe there's an activity even called, right, effective communication, which touches on some of these issues. So you'll define what good writing means using a combination of the concepts we've covered in class, plus your own personal touches on what good writing means to you. You'll identify that problem that you're going to be working on this month. So, what industry issue you have chosen to focus on. Describe what the problem is, who it affects, and why it's important to you. And finally, discuss how you're going to use those good writing skills that you defined when you deal with your topic in the eventual essay form. And then part two, you just have to write 2 meaningful responses to at least 2 of your classmates. Okay, so I just extended that assignment. It was due tonight by midnight, Tuesday, but now I've extended it till Thursday. So hopefully people will get on board and complete that. Okay, so back on schedule. I think that's the only key reminders I wanted to make aside from completing this go-to quiz, which is due Thursday. So now because of the extension I created, we have 2 things that are due Thursday, right? If you didn't participate in that very first discussion, you have until Thursday to complete it. But you also have until Thursday to either attend live or watch the recording of this session that I'm giving now and take the quiz associated with this session by Thursday. Okay, so back to the presentation. Let's talk about some essay fundamentals because you're going to need them to complete the next discussion activity. Okay, so we've just completed one discussion activity. Now we're moving on to the next one. And all of these are building blocks so that when it comes time to write the essay in week 4, you've already got most of the pieces in place. But in order to get started on the essay, we need to talk about thesis statements. Now, you've probably heard that word thesis before. In high school, you probably heard it. If you've taken a college level English class somewhere else other than the LA Film School, you've probably heard it. Here it is in its essence. A thesis acts like a roadmap to your paper. And remember that comparison, a roadmap. Okay, that's what my picture here shows, a roadmap. It might play a role in one of your quiz questions. So a thesis acts like a roadmap, and it typically appears at the end of your introduction paragraph. Put simply, a thesis is a sentence or two that defines your paper and tells readers where your paper is heading. Thesis is important here because you're going to need it to complete the next discussion activity, but also because the thesis will be a fundamental part of your eventual essay. And the good news is, for the project we're working on this month, the eventual essay, the thesis is actually pretty simple. The thesis is going to be a statement of your solution to the problem that you've identified. So unlike other classes where you have to come up with a really subjective thesis or an interpretive thesis, right? Remember English classes? You have to read, I don't know, a short story or a novel and come up with an original insight that's in the form of a thesis. Here you don't need to do that. It's just a straightforward statement of what you want your audience to do regarding your industry problem. And I'm going to show an example of that in just 2 seconds. But that's what a thesis is. Okay, it's a single sentence or two that appears at the end of your introduction that sort of gives a preview to readers about where your paper is heading. So let's talk about the next assignment, which is a discussion board activity called Finding Your Solution. Right? Here it is, assignment number 2, find your solution. Due December 14th. What day is that? Well, the 11th is a Sunday. So that means 12, 13, no, the 11th is a Thursday. So that's Sunday, okay? So coming up this Sunday, there's another discussion board activity that needs to be completed. And if I go into the activity, I've actually already modeled what you need to do. I thought it would be more helpful instead of just going over the assignment sheet dryly to actually show you what you need to do. But before that, let's take a look at a couple other things. What you're going to be working on in assignment number 2 is you're going to be creating briefs. No, not these kind of briefs. Okay, those are different kind of briefs. The briefs we'll be creating are the kind you've probably heard about. When you think about legal matters, you've probably heard of law case briefs, right? There's the overall lawsuit, and then there's the brief. A brief is exactly what it sounds like. It's a shortened, condensed, abbreviated form of the much larger document. As a matter of fact, you can even hear the same words at work there. Brief, abbreviated. And that's what you're doing for this next discussion board activity. You're going to create an abbreviated form of what will eventually become your paper. In some ways, it's similar to an outline. It has a couple small differences, and I'm going to highlight what those are. But if we look at the official assignment sheet, and always please go over the assignment sheets carefully. Read every word. I know that sometimes you don't like to do that, and I don't like to do it either. I'm one of those people who wants to just skip the instructions and start right away, or I'll get to a website that's explaining what I need to do to download the software installed, and I just skip past those instructions and I want to do it all on my own. But I do encourage you to take the time to read through these instructions pretty carefully. It covers what you need specifically to do in great detail. For example, this discussion post assignment is a bit longer than the first one. Here, the original post needs to be at least 350 words. And then when you respond to classmates' posts, at least 2 of them, they need to be at least 250 words each. Okay? But the main thing we're doing here, which is explained in the instructions, is to first remind us of what you're working on. So what is the problem that you've identified in your industry? What is your solution to that problem? We haven't talked about that yet, but what do you think can be done about this issue? And 3, what target audience do you think you'll try to reach with your solution? Number 2, and this is still part 1, okay? 2 is to construct a brief. And you can use the student sample in your textbook, page 273, as a guide, or you can use the example that I've already posted to that specific discussion board. I thought it would be helpful if I modeled what you needed to do. But if we go to the McGraw-Hill site, which is right here, and click on our textbook, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Once the textbook loads, we can jump to any page that we need. So it told me to go to page 273 in the instructions, so I'm going to go there. And here you get an explanation of what a brief is, and it gives an example. Okay? But because this example is sort of, I mean, it's fine, but it's just not the sort of topic that we're dealing with in this class. I would still go here. I would still look at the example. But I've sort of done this exact same thing but I've chosen an industry topic, and I've posted it to the board. So let's take a look at that. Okay. Oh, quick reminder too. Don't forget about these Learn Smart Achieve modules, okay? Remember I told you these are easy points because you just need to complete them to 100% and you get all of those points. So you're not graded on which questions you get wrong or which questions you need to do over because the modules sort of gauge how you're doing. So if you're answering questions incorrectly, it will give you more. If you're getting them answered correctly, more often than not, it will allow you to progress. But as long as you hit 100%, you get all of those points. Don't forget too about the week 3 readings. Okay, all about persuasion. These are really, really important readings, and as I mentioned, most of the readings are short, so there's really not much reason why you can't make it through these. Okay, but if we go back to the discussion board for the upcoming assignment, the finding a solution discussion assignment, I've already posted to the board. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I've even said here, Mr. Sussman's industry problem post. Use this example model for your own posts. And then I include a note that some of the material is incomplete. I mean, I tried to do it as completely as I could, but I created this somewhat quickly. So most of the pieces are in place, but when you create your own brief, you'll need to answer things thoroughly. Sometimes I'm doing that, sometimes I'm not. So here's my part one. What is my industry problem? For this task, I'm going to pretend that I am an LA Film School student studying music or music production. Okay, so I picked a music specific topic. So here's my industry problem: royalty rates paid to artists by streaming music services. Okay, that's a pretty concrete and specific topic. A lot of people would agree that that is an issue or a problem that's currently facing the music industry. By the way, I've been giving you lots of feedback on your own topic proposals, and for a lot of you, I've suggested to be a bit more specific or a bit more concrete. And it's not because I understand that these are your papers, not mine. These are your topics, not mine. But I just sort of intuitively know from past experience that the more concrete, the more real, the more specific that your industry problem is, the easier it is. Because then you'll be able to research something very, very specific instead of something that's very broad or very vague. So, anyway, there's my industry problem: royalty rates paid to artists by streaming music services. Here's my solution. Okay, we haven't talked about solutions, but for this activity, you'll need to come up with one. Here's mine. Music fans, let me blow this up a little bit. Music fans need to be encouraged to purchase monthly subscriptions to streaming music services. Okay, that's my solution. And as I say in the note here, by the way, you don't have to include a note when you make your post. I'm doing this to help you understand my thinking. My solution is small because personally I like smaller, more feasible solutions. Your solution could be larger, okay? Or it could even be smaller than mine. Again, this is your paper, this is your project. I like smaller solutions because if we think about it, the royalty rates paid out to artists by streaming music services, like what could my solution be? I could just demand that these companies pay more, but that's not a very eloquent solution, nor is it very reasonable. Because places like Spotify and Pandora, they're not just going to start paying more because I demand them to. So my thinking is, what could I reasonably ask for? And this is my sort of solution: that fans could be encouraged to purchase monthly subscriptions to these streaming music services. Who is my target audience? Music fans themselves. Note, I could have tried to reach a completely different audience. I could have tried to address the streaming music companies. I could have come up with a solution that tries to target, oh, I don't know, the artists themselves. Okay, but that would probably, not probably, it would create probably a much different solution. It would affect my entire essay. My essay would be much different in terms of its strategies, perhaps in terms of its language, just by my changing my audience. But I'm going to go with music fans themselves. That's my solution. That royalty rates to artists could be improved if the fans would just pay the $10 a month for a monthly subscription. No, it wouldn't solve everything. We would hardly return to the world of 25 years ago where people were selling gold records left and right and making lots and lots of money off of physical music sales. But at least it would be a baby step in the right direction. If everybody paid for a monthly subscription, artists would have a bit more money in their pockets. Okay, so that's my solution. So there's part one. What's my problem? What's my solution? Who am I trying to reach with this solution? Part two, my brief. I begin with my thesis, what I'm actually arguing for, okay? Worded as a specific sentence or two. So here's my thesis. Though declining music sales and artists' decreasing incomes cannot be reversed entirely, the industry can at least recover somewhat if more music listeners paid for music, specifically in the form of subscription music services. Okay? So it's formally stated because I'm trying to establish my credibility. But there's my thesis, okay? It's a single sentence that clearly states my solution and who I'm trying to reach. I'm trying to reach music listeners, and I'm asking them to do something, to pay for music in the form of monthly subscription, monthly subscriptions to music services. Next part of the brief is you need to come up with three reasons, okay? Three sort of pieces of supporting evidence for why your solution is feasible or even why your topic is important, okay? In other words, I need to make the case. Let's say I'm trying to convince you. You're watching this session now. Maybe you're thinking, you know what? I do pay for music from time to time for the artists I love, but I don't have that much money. I can't buy every single album that I love. I can't buy every single individual song that I love. I like using YouTube. I like using the free accounts over at Spotify and Pandora. Okay, so my job is to convince you to consider my solution. And I need three reasons. So here are my three reasons. Reason number one. Although free streaming music accounts offer a legal option for music listeners to access music, the royalty rates paid to artists are very low. Okay, so there's my reason number one. I acknowledge the fact that free accounts are great, but unfortunately, the royalty rates associated with that are very, very low. When you state each of your three reasons, you need to come up with three of them. You need to provide evidence. And the evidence is simply you're going to put an APA reference for whatever piece of research you found that contributed to your understanding of your reason number one. I've gone ahead and done that here. I found an article by Paul Resnikoff called What Your Streaming Music Service is Actually Paying Artists. I've created a full APA style citation for it. When you insert here is the instructions, right? Insert your APA reference. So it needs to be in APA format. So I've showcased that here. Technically, this second line needs to be indented, but I had trouble doing that. There's a third thing you need to do for each of your reasons. Okay, so you provide your APA reference as evidence for what you're saying, and you also need to label the appeal type, and you need at least one appeal type per reason. I know it's sounding a little bit confusing. You need to come up with three reasons. For each of the three reasons, you need to do three things, and we just went over the three different appeal types: logos, pathos, and ethos. But again, you have this model to follow. Name your reason, put in your APA reference for your evidence, and then identify the appeal type. Here I'm calling this logos, okay? Because the royalty rates paid to artists being very low, to me that feels like logos. And I even give an example. You don't have to do this part here. I'm just doing this for your further understanding. But for instance, an artist would need her or his song streamed 130 times on Spotify to equal one iTunes purchase of a song. Okay, that's a fact. That's a statistic. That's why my reason number one here I see as kind of logos based. And by the way, that's truly what I researched from this article here. And if you could think about it, that really puts into stark relief the issue that musicians are facing. Because what do iTunes singles sell for now? Like $1.29 or sometimes 99 cents. Imagine that. A single song on Spotify needs to be listened to 130 times before it even equals a single $1.29 download over at iTunes. And the artist doesn't get all that $1.29. Okay? A good chunk of it goes to the record label. Another big chunk of it, especially if you didn't write the song, goes to the people who composed that song. Or even if you did write the song, if you have a music publishing deal, some of that money is going to go to the music publisher. I mean, sometimes artists are left with 16 cents of that $1.29. So you can do the math. It gets pretty ugly. The number of times a person actually has to stream a song through one of these music services in order to truly pay considerable amounts to artists. Okay, so here's reason number two. I'm going to try to speed up the pace here a little bit. Reason number two, consumers in this economy cannot afford to purchase every album that they like, but they should be able to afford the cost of a monthly streaming music subscription, which would also make them feel better knowing that they are helping to support artists. I didn't have time to find an actual research article for this, but I would put it here. Whatever my APA reference is for the article that helps support this reason, I'll put it in here. My appeal type, pathos, because I feel like I'm making an emotional argument for why people should pay for the monthly subscription. Okay, I get it. Not everybody can afford to purchase everything that they love, and it's tempting to use YouTube as a free sort of radio alternative or just sign up for the free account with Pandora or Spotify. But my emotional appeal comes here, right? The notion that you should feel better about at least helping in some small way to increase the amount of money that artists make. Okay, so there's an example of pathos. Reason number three, really simple. Artists deserve to be paid for their creative works. Again, as evidence, I would put in my APA reference for whatever research article I found that supports this. Just as a note, I could have found something pretty easily. For instance, Taylor Swift has been in the headlines a lot lately for not allowing her music to be played on Spotify. She actually makes a pretty passionate argument for why artists demand to be paid and how their music should not just be available for free. So I label that as ethos. Okay, I'm making it could be pathos too because I'm sort of playing on emotions here, saying that they artists deserve to be paid, but it's pathos as well because I'm relying on Taylor Swift's own words to build credibility. Okay, so this is what you're doing. I've already modeled what you need to do. You'll have to again fill in. I say insert your reference here, but you'll actually have to do that. But this is what you need to do. Come up with three reasons in support of what you're arguing, and have at least one of the three different appeal types, logos, pathos, and ethos, appearing somewhere under each of these reasons. Okay? And if you can't tell already, we're sort of putting together an outline. It doesn't look like the traditional outline you perhaps made back in high school, right? Remember Roman numerals, and then you indent a little bit and put a capital letter, right? It's a series of points and subpoints. We're not doing that so much here, but it is outline like, and I'm going to show you in an upcoming slide how we're going to take all this information and use it as the blueprint to create our actual essay. But this is what you're doing, okay? A reminder that once you make your original post, you're not done. You'll have to respond to at least two of your classmates' posts. And think back to the RISE model that I introduced in week one. Or if you don't like the RISE model and you want to just do it intuitively, that's fine as well. But keep these sort of core principles in mind. We're trying to help one another. And helping one another means that we're reading each other's work with care and we're trying to be very, very specific with our feedback. So, for example, let's pretend I'm a student in this class. Let's say you have an issue with my industry problem. I actually think my industry problem is pretty good and specific, but let's say you think it's vague or it's too rooted in personal opinion, or you think that it's I don't know, that it's going to be difficult to find research on, or that it can't be proven. Like, I would need to hear that. Why let me get all the way to week 4 where I have to write the essay and suddenly realize that I'm sort of stranded because my topic is blurry or vague, or it's way too broad. We need to kind of alert one another to these issues. Same thing with the other pieces. If the solution sounds unreasonable or fictional or not very real world based, you can express that to your colleagues. Okay, we're big boys and girls. We can take constructive feedback if it's worded politely, and consider it. After all, if I don't agree with your feedback, I don't necessarily have to follow it, but at least it's there for me to consider. And do that for the entire brief. Okay, look at the person's thesis sentence. Does it seem reasonable? Is it clearly stated? Do you see a clear solution? Like, you're arguing for something specific. And here, my solution is that music fans need to start paying for monthly subscriptions. Is there a target audience in place, right? music listeners themselves? And do you see that as the most reasonable or appropriate audience to try to reach? Look through each of the reasons the person has posted and see if they make sense. See if they pass your common sense test. See if they hold up to your own notions of logic. Okay? This is the time to just really give each other strong feedback so that we enter week 4 with the most information possible to help us write a really, really solid essay. Okay, and if you're doing that for at least 2 people, you'll do fine. And remember that always on the assignment sheets you have a rubric at the end that reminds you of what you need to do. So, for instance, when it comes to responding to at least 2 of your classmates, to get full points, the responses to 2 of your classmates need to be specific, detailed, and contribute to the discussion. Okay, the writer, meaning you, provides your classmates, your colleagues, with specific examples, or you ask questions, right? You're furthering the discussion. You're giving them something to think about. So remember, you always have this rubric to remind you of what you're working on. I'm going to close some of these windows because my machine is running a bit hot. Okay, so you have this modeled example. Let's go back to the presentation. Let's get a little bit ahead of ourselves and talk about introduction paragraphs. You won't have to worry about this as much until we get to the actual essay itself, but I think it's useful to start thinking about it now just because thesis statements and your solution are an integral part of writing your introduction. Introductions do, I think, 3 basic things. They briefly define the issue at hand. Okay, more development takes place in the body of the paper. You're not going to spill the beans entirely in the first paragraph, but you do briefly define the issue at hand. Oh, someone just entered the room. Let's see who's here. Romar is here. Romar, the good news is you're here. The bad news is I started the session without you, so we're about 40 minutes into it. You'll have to kind of re-watch the first 40 minutes to get brought up to speed. But I'm glad that you could attend at least for a little while. We're talking about introduction paragraphs. So introductions briefly define the issue at hand. More development occurs later. Introduction should end with that clear thesis statement, right? So what we just talked about, that for this class, the thesis statement is pretty easy. It's just a statement of your solution and who you're specifically targeting. Finally, introductions ideally should find an engaging way to grab the reader's attention. So how do we do that? How do we grab a reader's attention? There are some tips and tricks that I always recommend. I call them hooks. And here are some of the more common hooks, the common methods you can use to begin an introduction paragraph. You can start with an example or an anecdote. Okay, that example can be personal. Maybe you have a personal story that relates perfectly to your topic. Or maybe it's not your personal story, maybe it's the story of someone else. Or maybe it's something you read about in the news. Or maybe it's something that I don't know, something that you saw in a film or a documentary, right? You can rely on examples, in other words, personal or researched or otherwise, in order to sort of transition us into your topic at hand. Some of these others you've probably heard of. Begin with a thoughtful question. Begin with a powerful quotation. Begin with a dramatic or descriptive hypothetical scene. That's just a fancy way of saying that you can create your own sort of imagined scenario. It might be imagined, but it has a specificity of reality. I often like to call them what if scenarios or imagine this scenarios. You can begin with an insightful or surprising fact or statistic. Okay, so these are some of the most common ways to begin an essay. I will say, though, that even though these are all terrific techniques, they're all terrific hooks to grab your reader, they become less successful if you're just using them generically. For example, yes, it's great to begin with a thoughtful question. It's not such a great idea to begin your essay with a question that you're not really interested in your readers answering. An essay that just begins, what is love? But you're not really interested in exploring the answer to that question, then it's just a sort of empty question. Same thing with any of these devices. A quotation that's just dropped in out of nowhere, and and that you don't really deal with in any meaningful way, that's not really an attention grabbing move. That's just you sort of beginning with a quotation because the teacher said it's a good strategy. They're all terrific techniques, but only if you use them usefully. So here's an example of what an introduction paragraph might look like for my topic using one of these techniques. Okay, introduction paragraph example. I will read this out loud, by the way. Remember, my topic, and this is also to remind Romar, who's just entered the room, my topic, my industry problem are the low royalty rates that streaming music services pay out to artists. Okay, so here's how I begin. In 2011, pop star Lady Gaga was paid $167 for 1 million plays of her 2008 hit Poker Face via Spotify. Yes, that is correct, $167. This shockingly low figure highlights an important problem, namely the low royalty rates that streaming music services pay out to artists. Digital music in all its forms is certainly the future of music, and streaming sites like Spotify and Pandora offer attractive options for consumers, but artists are struggling to survive in the current environment. The streaming music companies argue that they cannot pay more and are already operating at a deficit. But there is a solution that consumers can follow to help artists and to increase sluggish music sales. And here comes my thesis. While free streaming music accounts are attractive, music fans should consider paying the reasonable monthly subscription fees offered by these sites because everyone will benefit. Okay? And if we break this down, look at the technique I'm using. I'm using the technique of beginning with an insightful or surprising fact, right? I want people to realize that Poker Face, which was probably the biggest song in the world back in 2008, only made $167 for Lady Gaga in 2011. That's my example to show how even very successful artists don't make a tremendous amount of money on the music that is streamed. Notice it's not just a generic dropping in of a fact that I don't deal with, right? I comment on it. Yes, that is correct, $167. I use that to transition into my larger topic. This shocking figure highlights an important problem, the low royalty rates. I talk about that issue for a couple sentences. Okay, I'm not getting into it too much because I'm going to save my major points for the body of the essay itself. But this is essentially what an introduction does. Ideally, we find an interesting way to begin, we talk about the issue for a few sentences, and then we end with our clear thesis statement. Now, here's the good news. Once you finish and complete that brief that you need to post to the discussion board, Romar probably doesn't know what I'm talking about, but the next assignment I've already modeled on the discussion board itself. But I'll put it up here again for the people who watch this after the fact. Once we have our brief, which is sort of like an outline, then we can start putting together our paper. Because we have all the pieces that we need, right? We'll have an introduction that ends with our thesis. Your first body paragraph will be reason number one. So if I go back to my brief, reason number one, what did I say? Right? That the royalty rates paid out to artists are very, very low. Okay, so I'd write an entire paragraph about that. Then I would create another body paragraph that focuses on reason number two, which in my brief was, that people will feel better knowing that they are paying for monthly subscriptions because they know they'll just know that they're helping out artists, and that will make them feel positive. Okay. A third body paragraph would focus on my reason number three, which was artists deserve to be paid for their creative work. So you can see how this is working. When you complete all these activities, you have the blueprint in place to create your actual essay. Introduction, body paragraph that focuses on reason number one, another body paragraph that focuses on reason number two, a third body paragraph that focuses on reason number three, and a conclusion where you explore your solution with a bit more depth and bring the essay to a satisfying close. So, again, you're not entering week 4 with no idea how to put the essay together. You're already building it through these earlier activities. Okay, a few final points before we close today's session. Audience, have one. Okay, I already demonstrated when we took a look at the brief that I modeled on the discussion board. I'm targeting music fans, right? My solution to the issue of low royalty rates paid out to artists is to encourage music fans to just spend the $10 on a monthly subscription, right? They can afford that. Not asking them to go out and buy every album in the universe or download and pay for every single, but to pay the $10 for Spotify or Pandora. It won't solve everything, but it will put a few more dollars in artists' pockets, and that's a good thing. Again, if I change the audience to something else, the artists themselves, the streaming music companies themselves, that would entirely change my solution and the entire framework of my essay. So don't just have an audience, but be aware of what specific audience you're trying to reach. Finally, to conclude today's session, I want to briefly return to APA format. Last week, you might remember, I walked us through in real time how to set up a Microsoft Word document in APA format, but we mostly focused on the small stuff like margins and spacing and paragraphing and centering and all that kind of nitpicky stuff, right? So that your essay looks like it's in the right format. But as I mentioned in the brief, you need to insert an APA referenced source for each of the three reasons that you create. And it needs to be in APA format. So here's what APA format looks like. The good news is you do have tools that can help you. For instance, the McGraw-Hill readings from week 2, which you should have already done, focus on APA. Okay, and if you scroll down, where are they? Okay, how do I make entries in a reference list using APA style? That will be incredibly helpful for this assignment, where you have to create a brief. Okay, and it covers how to do that. There's another neat trick I want to show you. Oh, there's also another place you can go to, which is projectapa.info. I believe I showed this last week as well. But here it shows you how to handle references entries. Okay, so you have this information at your fingertips as well. There's another trick I want to show you, which is if we go to the portal. Oops, I can't type. Right, I showed this last week. Portal.lafilm.edu. One of your quiz questions for last week's quiz was to go to the library, find a journal article, summarize it, and cite it. Some people had some issues with that. But let's look at an example. So I'm going to go into the database, right? So database and online journals. By the way, I'm not explaining the steps as much in detail as I did last week because I covered it there. So if you need to watch the week 2 session, do so. But I'm basically walking us through the steps to get to the databases. Okay, let's go into Academic Search Elite. And let me just search for something at random, okay? So how about my topic? Streaming, music, royalties. I'll hit search. Okay, why music should not be free. Chief defends Spotify because I can only use full text versions of articles. The payout, how iTunes royalty rates work. That sounds pretty interesting. Let me click on that. Let's say I found this article. It's incredibly useful. I want to use it as one of the pieces of evidence, not just for my essay, but for the brief that I'm going to create for the upcoming discussion board assignment. Okay, you have this neat function over here called cite. It's a citation generator. If we click on it, it gives us the APA reference. Okay. The only problem is that the citation generator tends to make small mistakes, typically in terms of capitalization. I'm actually going to try to choose a different article because I don't like that one because it doesn't have an author and that might be confusing for people. Let's try this one. Okay, this one comes from Billboard. I'm going to click the Cite button. And there's my APA thing. Okay? This is mostly correct. We just need to fix things. For example, authors' names are not supposed to be in all caps. Article titles are not supposed to be in all caps. As a matter of fact, for APA format, you don't even capitalize keywords. You only capitalize the very first letter of the first word and everything else is in lowercase, just like you would do in a normal sentence. So we need to fix all that. But I'll still take it. I'll copy it over. Okay. And let's say that I'm working on the next discussion board assignment where you need to write that brief. So finding a solution. Let me go back into there. Oops, I clicked on the wrong thing. Let me go to the discussion board itself. Okay, so here's my post. Just for the sake of showing how it's done, I'm going to go ahead and edit this. And for reason number 2, I don't actually have a piece of evidence, so I'm going to go ahead and put that article in. Let's say that that article perfectly supports what I'm saying here. So I'll paste in my thing. I'll fix the mistakes. Author's name is not supposed to be in all caps. Article title is not supposed to be in all caps. The bottom line is the name. If you can do this much, I'll already consider it APA format. Technically, we're supposed to add the words retrieved from. And if we go back to the article in the database, you have this little link here. It's called a permalink. If I click on that, it gives me the specific link to this article. If you just grab the URL from up here, I'll get an error, so please don't do that. And we paste the permalink right after the words retrieved from. Technically, we're supposed to indent any lines that go on to a second or third line, so I could do that. But mostly we have it in place. By the way, the same thing applies to websites. For example, this was a website. So here's the author's name, Reznikov P. Actually, I forgot. Oops, I forgot to include a date. This is 2011. So last name of the author, first initial, date, year of publication for the article in question. The title of the article. Again, it follows capitalization rules as normal sentences. So I'm not capitalizing keywords. I'm just putting most of the words in lowercase except for the very first word of that article. Now, if proper nouns appear in the article title, like someone's name or, I don't know, the name of a city or a state, yes, you would capitalize that. Again, following the normal rules of capitalization for just a normal sentence, you would capitalize it. Same rules apply here. After the article title, I put the name of the publication in italics. And here, again, the retrieved from line. Because this didn't come from the LA Film School database, I don't have a permalink. I just put in the URL for that website. Okay? So basically the same logic applies to both. Just slightly different formats. But do understand that anything that you find through the LA Film School library database, you do have this nifty little citation function here that can help you out. Okay, so there's a nice little trick to use. But you also have lots of other resources. Your McGraw-Hill readings, Project APA info. You have all the material there at your fingertips. I think I might have mentioned this last week, but APA, it can seem annoying, it can seem nitpicky, but it's really just a matter of finding the example or the model that you need to follow and following it. Okay? Even though this doesn't relate, I'm just going to go ahead and update it anyway because it acts as an example. Okay, so we've covered a lot. If we go back to the agenda, here's everything that we covered today. A reminder to get moving on the stuff that was already due that people are falling a little bit behind on. We talked about the different ways to reach an audience through emotion, logic, and by building credibility. We talked about thesis statements. We talked about the second assignment that's upcoming, a discussion board assignment, where the main task is to create a brief. We talked about introduction paragraphs. We took a look at how this activity here is actually creating a blueprint for your essay that you'll write in week 4. And finally, some reminders about the importance of audience and APA. We only have one person in the room, but are there any questions? Romar, you're probably feeling half with us, half lost. Romar, any questions that you want to ask in real time? That was Romar sent me a private message, but which actually is showing up in the recording, so it's not as private as you think. I apologize for that. My screen recording captures everything. Because we only have one person in the room, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, not the session, because I'll talk to Romar a little bit one on one. But I'm going to go ahead and close the stop the recording. So if you have any questions, please send me a message through the LA Film School portal, or you can send me an email directly. But let's get moving on the assignments that have already been due that some people have missed out on. I've already extended the date of the discussion that was supposed to end tonight, so please take advantage of that extension. Let's try to keep up on things, and best of luck, okay? Thank you so much for watching.